is Jesse Chaison with Lisa Blanchard as the host of Airing Addiction.
I share often my journey started on this campus. Got sober as a client here, just like you.
I really do see phenomenal change.
Always hope. I've seen situations that on the surface look impossible become possible.
Doing this podcast is to share those recovery stories, be honest about what the challenges are and have some real conversations, but kind of share that out on the airwaves.
Welcome everybody to Airing Addiction. If you're watching this live or shortly after it comes out, we are in week 2 of Recovery Month. We are following SAMHSA's recovery themes for this month. And today we have a good one. I say that all the time, but this is a very practical, very something that, you know, we need to be talking about when it comes to all things recovery, addiction, mental health, just all things in general, really. I mean, starting at a foundational piece. So I am so glad that we are in for a treat today with a panel discussion. I will turn things to Lisa to introduce. Who do we have today, Lisa?
Thanks so much, Jesse. Yeah, so as you mentioned, we kind of are going with the focused weeks of Recovery Month and doing a podcast that fits each week. You know, last week, if you had a chance to listen, was on health, and we talked with the Phoenix, and there's just some great integration of how that supports recovery. And today is probably one of the biggest cornerstones that really can either support or get in the way of recovery, and that's housing, right? And the idea that you really do need a safe, stable living environment to recover, right, from either mental health or substance use problems. And we just really all need that, right? We all just need a safe place to call home. And we know it's just a big challenge. The housing market is really difficult. There's lots of challenges. It's really hard, but that is, I think, pretty much what you just said, Jesse, creates that foundation for a life in recovery. So we have a panel today. We figured that was kind of the best way to have this conversation because sadly, none of us have the answer, right? None of us are like, this is what we should do. And it would solve the housing crisis. It would solve homelessness. Like none of us have gotten there yet. So having kind of a multi-view perspective and just a conversation, we felt was the best way to do that. So with us today, we have Chaison Davis, who's been in public health for almost 5 years, working with individuals living with and affected by HIV, lots of work in the harm reduction, health policy, community organizing, and LGBTQ plus healthcare areas. And so that's really, it sounds like a lot of your passion in removing structural barriers, which housing is probably one of the biggest ones. And we also have Amy Arell, who is the direct service coordinator at Open Sky in Worcester, Mass, very close to where I am sitting right now. And she oversees 24 community-based programs serving over 1,000 individuals with justice involvement, homelessness, which is what we're here to talk about today, substance use and mental health and social determinants. She also led the implementation of this state's first Department of Correction funded incarceration support service, Compass. So we'll talk a little bit about Community Compass. We'll talk a little bit about that as well, with over 29 years of experience. And we have Vaughn Pomassen, who is the managing director at the Greater Worcester Housing Connection at SMOC. And SMOC's been doing this work for a very, very long time. And Vaughn has been doing that with them for 17 years, working in shelter and supportive housing components, overseeing operations in Worcester, focusing specifically on shelter and housing. So really some great experience, some great conversation we can have here today. But I'll probably kick us off just by starting with Chaison, because I do am part of a lot of the committees working with the MetroWest Care Connection. And so I'm aware of what your housing coalition has been doing and to better understand the housing needs and the challenges in the MetroWest community. So I thought maybe we could start off with you just sharing kind of what are some of the things that you learned about housing and what the challenges are.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks so much for having me today. I'm excited to be part of the panel. Yeah, so as you alluded to, Lisa, the MetroWest Housing Coalition, which is convened by the MetroWest Care Connection, we recently did a series of community listening sessions with around 166 Framingham residents. So we spoke with them to, hear their experiences around housing access. And I do have some statistics that we pulled out from those discussions. So of the folks that we spoke with, 56% were currently living in unstable housing situations. 65% have encountered financial obstacles specifically when trying to access affordable housing. And I think this is, very a stark statistic. 76% must decide between paying for housing expenses and paying for basic necessities, many of which indicated that that's really a regular occurrence. And many folks that we spoke with are folks either in recovery, affected by substance use or mental health. And there was huge overlaps there. So I don't want to jump too far into it, but I think maybe setting the stage is, I do have a quote that I think, really stuck out to me, from one of the participants, which was, this person said, "I'm not very comfortable in my current situation. I'm really worried that my current situation will make me relapse again. I was recently released from incarceration and am presently experiencing homelessness and am in recovery." So I think that really encapsulates kind of the link between mental health, substance use, and housing. And there was just in our discussions an overwhelming desire for more supportive housing options for folks at various stages in their mental health or substance use journey or recovery, whatever that looks like for them.
Yeah, definitely, Kate. And I think that quote hits it on all the different points of what we're talking about here, as far as, if we can't find a foundation that's stable and healthy. And, I jotted down those statistics that over half of the people that came to these listening sessions, almost 200 people. So that, you're talking about quite a few people dealing with unstable housing. I think it's great that the listening sessions took place. What a great opportunity to really get, like you just said, the quote, right from the people that you're serving. I'm just wondering what's the next step after the listening sessions?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I'm glad that you brought that up. So now we've looked at all the data, we've got a report, which we're working on getting on our website. That should be up very shortly. But we're circling back with the sites because we hosted these sessions in partnership with community organizations. So SMOC, Spectrum, actually. So thank you all for collaborating with us. So we're circling back with the sites to share the results. We want to make sure that the folks that participated also get to see what came out of their participation and, their labor and time. And then the next step, which is part of kind of our longer goals, is engaging residents in our housing coalition. So it's in our first year has been only provider focused, which has been very great, very dynamic. But our next step is to engage residents. So we are hiring for a community organizer who is going to be really crucial in getting residents engaged in the coalition. We're very excited. We've got some funding from the Massachusetts Community Health and Healthy Aging Funds to stipend residents that are going to be participating in our coalition. So we're super excited to kind of help mitigate some barriers to participation. And, we welcome anyone to reach out if there's any involvement that they're interested in at whatever level of participation is comfortable for them.
I think that's so important because so many of us just, choose not to look at the real challenges of homelessness and housing in our communities, even if it hits really close to home. And so really involving folks that are having challenges with housing or housing instability or just fearful that they will go down that path, it really kind of puts that actual human face on this challenge, just like we do in so many spaces in recovery, right? Like it should be, nothing about us without us. And it should be that real conversation of including those that are most impacted to hear what it's really like and to develop solutions around those conversations instead of what like people way over here who are going back to a super stable housing environment, right? Have to think might be helpful. I wonder, Amy, one of the things that Caden talked about was was in that quote really was that criminal justice population. I know that's been a big focus of your work. Anything that you would want to comment on what that challenge looks like, maybe post incarceration or while engaged in kind of community supervision.
Yeah, I think that there are so many barriers to housing for people who don't also have to carry the stigma of having a record. And the problem is that the rents are so very high and the apartments are so few that landlords can choose between 50, 75 different applicants for a unit. And a unit that before might have sat vacant for, a few weeks while they were waiting for applications. Now, landlords are renting units before the other tenant even moved out. And every new tenant, the rents are being raised. So when you're returning from incarceration and you don't have a job, you don't have an income, and you're dealing with all the stress and trauma of what you've just experienced, and you're trying to get back to those connections with the people that you've left behind, reintegrating into a community, depending on how long it's been. If you've been in for a long time, you might not be familiar with the way we rent apartments now. Yeah. Right? We don't rent in the newspaper anymore. We've had folks come out and say, well, I'm looking for signs in windows, or I'm looking in the newspaper, because they don't have an email address. They're not familiar with that kind of technology, which poses an even greater challenge. So I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done around creating more options for people and more affordable choices.
Certainly, Amy, you bring up a great point that, depending on how long the individual was incarcerated, released and yeah, things change, and whoa, things have changed, right? And, I'm just reflecting on my own experience of homelessness and incarceration. And, the reality is that I myself, even up until, 5 years ago, could not rent an apartment in the quote unquote traditional way, and instead relied on word of mouth or other people in the recovery community to say, hey, I have this apartment. It was almost like an underground vetting process. I know so-and-so, so-and-so, what do you think? I'm just wondering if you're seeing any of that, or some of the creative ways that we are sort of finding housing for people who desperately need it and are coming up short in the more traditional ways.
I think that you hit it right on the head with a community. There are so many, we talk a lot about landlords and problems with landlords, but there are also so many landlords who are working with us, who are trying to make a difference, who understand the challenges that people face. One of the things I think as providers we do that helps the landlords is we make sure that we're offering supports to the person as they move in, so that they're not just dropped into an apartment and kind of left there to figure things out for themselves. It makes a landlord feel better to know that our staff are going to be reaching out to them, that we're going to be visiting them, that we're going to be calling them, that they can come into the community compass to get the resources that they need. And that if there are any problems with the person's permission, we can help negotiate those. And I think that we have developed kind of a network of landlords that really do want to make a difference. I think it makes a dent, but there is still a huge problem with not enough units, not enough apartments for everyone who wants them. But we have some amazing landlords that we work with. Yeah. And I just wanted to say, Caden, I so appreciate what you said about offering stipends for people's time. I love that you're valuing people's time and energy and input, and not just taking that for granted. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm very grateful that we're able to do that because you're right. The folks have expertise, like folks lived experience. There's a reason we're talking to them. There's value. And they should be compensated for that. So we were able to do that with the listening sessions as well, which was amazing. And folks really expressed gratitude. I think just real quick, if I could say something that you just made me kind of think of, Amy, is when we spoke with folks, what kept coming up is a lot of folks that we spoke with being grateful to us for listening, which I think is just so impactful. I think, here I was sitting there feeling grateful to them for opening up about very personal, vulnerable things to a stranger and trusting me and my team. And I think it just goes it speaks to the level of marginalization and stigma that folks face, that simply being heard can mean so much. So I think that just shows we really have to continue prioritizing that and valuing it.
Yeah, Katie, and I just wanted to mention that the data that you shared was very valuable, and it really shows to, some of the challenges that we're seeing. And just to tag on to what you were saying, Amy, we're seeing with SMOC very similar challenges. We work with a very difficult population that are dual diagnosed, they're chronically homeless, no one wants to rent to them, they have a long history of, a CORI. And, when you look at a CORI, you automatically judge someone, right? You don't know really the things that they've had to go through. So I think some of our challenges is, and I'm sure that the panel can agree, is the lack of housing inventory. Open Skies going after units, CHL. So we're kind of competing for, one unit amongst other external sources. In addition to that, I would say that not only are they struggling with their mental health and their active use, but they don't have an income, and there's a lack of subsidies. So what do we do with these individuals that are struggling with their mental health, maybe not being not getting the medications that they need or not being seen, and they're actively using, they really have no income. So it becomes really challenging where they really give up. They're like, what do I do? I'm just going to be in shelter, and granted, shelter's there and it's going to help them, but we are seeing that without the housing inventory and the lack of subsidies, it's really difficult to move people along and get them where they can be stable. Where SMOC is very fortunate that we have, a housing continuum. We have over 300 units internally that we rent to our external and internal clients. We're also very fortunate that we do hold some subsidies where clients can access, but it doesn't capture everyone, right? Because you had mentioned, even with external landlords, you have to kind of build that relationship, and there isn't that stigma. There is that stigma of they're chronic, they're homeless, they look a certain way. So oftentimes they're judged immediately and they're not offered a unit because of the way they present. So I think for us, we work very hard in establishing landlord relationships. And one of the things, as you mentioned, Amy, we do the same is our style is we will provide ongoing case management, really a robust case management team that we will provide. It doesn't end. We will meet our clients where they're at. There's no requirements for them to sustain their housing. If they are active, they're not going to be asked to leave. We're going to continue to provide those services, and you might not want it today, but maybe tomorrow you will. So one of the things that we do sell is that we will provide ongoing case management, very intensive case management. And we will also provide, some maintenance stuff. There's a maintenance concern where it's our clients damaging the unit. We will come in and make those repairs. And I think that has been valuable, and a lot of landlords are more willing to work with us because we have, we have a pretty good maintenance team that will go in. And, again, we have a very, very challenging population where they're actively using. They're not really cleaning their unit. They're either hoarding. So landlords know that SMOC will go in and make these repairs. They know there's a case manager that's going to go in and provide those services that the client needs. But again, it goes back to not enough housing, right? Not enough subsidies, because not everyone in shelter has an income. And if they do have an income, it's a fixed income. I pulled some data from October 23 to like August, the end of August, and we served in shelter 1,362 individuals. And, we were able to permanently house 125, but still that's a good number, but it's still not where I'd like to see it. I'd like to see us house more than that. But it's hard. It's hard. You have, and I know I mentioned this, it's hard because the lack of income and that stigma behind that. So.
I find that the other thing that's really hard is in the past, we'd be able to do a really thorough housing assessment with the person and say, where do you prefer to live? What's the environment that's going to work for you? And initially, when we started this work, we were surprised at, we had an individual who was not doing well in the unit. And we found that he was sleeping in the living room, not in the bedroom. And then as we talked to him more, we realized that he wasn't comfortable unless from every corner of his unit, he could see the front door. And until that happened, he wasn't going to be able to relax. So we were able to find that. Now it's really difficult to find a unit at all. And then to find a unit that really matches what the person needs, because not everyone wants or can live in a building with someone on top of them, someone on the bottom of them, and someone on either side with the trauma that they've experienced. So it's not only about the number of units, it's offering people a choice that's going to work for them. That becomes even more challenging. You seen that too, Vaughn?
Yeah, I am. Again, we have so many guests in our shelter component, and we think about all these housing options. Really, well, not really a lot of housing options, but when the opportunity comes up, we really need to think it through, because we don't want to put somebody in a position where they're not going to succeed. And it's not just about just putting somebody in a room and that's at your house. It involves more than that. And we have a really great team when we meet in our housing meeting. We think about a lot of different factors. Is this housing unit going to really fit their needs? Are they going to be able to do what they need to do in this unit? So we really think it through, because one of the things that I'm always working towards is preventing this revolving door for the clients that we work with. Is I don't want to see them lose their housing and end up in shelter, and it becomes this revolving door, and then they kind of start back at square one. If they lose their subsidy due to an eviction, they might not get that again, and then they're back at square one. So, and it's hard when you're kind of at that, when you're back there, to kind of build, the documentation that you need for certain programs. So, thinking things through, again, making sure that really it's what the client wants. It's not what we want. I think we need to really remember that. It's not what we want. It's about what the client wants. And they may, and they have, denied multiple housing options. And maybe they weren't ready for that. And I think for us, it's kind of look at it in a different lens. Like, it's not about us, it's about them. And we want, for them to succeed, we might need to kind of step back a little bit and kind of meet them where they're at and not have those, those expectations.
No.
And once you get an eviction on your record, it's 10 times harder to find housing.
No.
What strikes me as a clinician a little bit is, that we really put people, particularly those working towards recovery, in a really impossible situation. It's really impossible to work towards recovery unless you have your basic needs met, right? Like, you go back to kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The very bottom of that pyramid is your physiological needs, your food, shelter, and then right above that is safety, right? And those two things, like that was such a great example, Amy, of like the needing the doors around you. That's going to create the safety that's going to allow that person to be successful. It's not just a roof over your head. Like it's so much more complicated than that. And we ask people to sometimes in our current system reach recovery first before they can be approved because they're reduced risk, right, for housing. And you can't get the income until you start. It's really just a really impossible challenge that we put people in. And there is so much judgment that's not trauma informed for why this might be so difficult and why someone might deny a housing option. Like, instead of like, you should take what you can get, it's like, does that work for me? And do I feel safe in that housing option, right? That's like right above that level on the pyramid. So it just really, really strikes me.
That came out a lot in the listening sessions. Like,
I bet.
Oh my gosh, so much of what you're speaking to. I was just looking through to see if I could find, because I recalled another quote that was really speaking to, I think, what Amy was saying with that example. There was someone that we were speaking with that was in a congregate living situation. That was their only option, not their preferred, not ideal. And what they said was that they said, I'm unable to have family come over to visit due to restrictions. I live in isolation and this is traumatizing. Family is a very important part of my support system. So whatever, I'm not sure what exactly the congregate living situation was, but due to whatever restrictions there were in that situation on visitors and guests, this person felt super isolated. And as we know, isolation is not good for mental health or recovery. So it's just a really, really, like you said, Lisa, it puts folks in almost an impossible situation.
And yet there are people who are meeting recovery and meeting these goals, the 300 units, Vaughn, that you spoke about with SMOC, and Amy, all the work that you're doing at Open Sky, and I'm hearing a lot of things. It's funny, I wrote down in my notes, Lisa, Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the trauma-informed care that yeah, maybe from the outside to someone that just doesn't understand all these specific unique needs of an individual, it's like, yeah, of course, you're going to take what you can get because it's better than sleeping on the street. But, I can speak from personal experience and clinical experience, and Caden with the quotes today in this episode. I mean, that just hit the nail on the head again, that, it's almost like, do I have a roof over my head and isolate myself from the rest of my support systems, or do I live in a place that's maybe not really the greatest to live, but at least I have my supports around me? And I don't think we should put anybody in that really impossible place of, having to decide between those two things. Right. So, I don't really have a question there other than just that I agree with the work that you all are doing. And I wonder, just throwing it out to the panel, any hope of things changing, any nuggets that you can share? I think we firmly talked about what the problem is, and the lack of housing inventory, and all the barriers that somebody would face from day one working with your agency to getting the keys into a certain place that fits the needs of that individual. Any stories of hope? We always talk about hope on this podcast. Any things that come out for any one of you about that?
I think that as people start to understand housing first principles, and more research is done, and there's more and more data that backs up the fact that it actually costs less to provide permanent supported housing than it does to have someone, in terms of like to society and medical costs and hospitalizations. that actually benefits all of us, both ethically, morally, as a community, but also financially. I think the more that research gets disseminated, the better off we're going to be. So I do think there's hope.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Amy, for that.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Amy, on that. Just the communication and the informing people a little bit more about it, because I don't think people really understand it.
Yeah, I concur. I also don't think people always, maybe people that maybe don't have experience with mental health challenges or substance use challenges or homelessness, that I don't know that folks always realize that, mental health and recovery, whatever that looks like for someone, those are full-time jobs, on top of everything else that you're doing. And so I think, I don't know, part of that education piece is kind of enlightening some folks that maybe don't realize the whole scope of, people are putting a lot into just maintaining or making it to the next hour. So I think having continued increased dialogue, about those, and just really trying to reduce stigma. But I do think that when folks were talking about creating relationships with landlords, I think that's a really big key. And I think trying to create kind of what I can't remember who said it, but those kind of like more informalized like networks of folks with lived experience and fostering them to be able to maybe become a landlord themselves, because then they can, have more of that holistic perspective. So I don't know if that answers anything, but those are just some of the things that are in my brain right now.
And I think that what we've seen, at least in Worcester, Greater Worcester County, is we've really started and continue to work together with the other agencies, because we have realized that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that we're competing with each other over units. It's better to work together for the benefit of everybody. And I think that our case managers know your case managers, and people are starting to really work together as a provider community. I think the other hopeful thing is I feel like people understand that this is a crisis. I feel like people in general understand and are starting to talk about the housing crisis that we're facing, and that it's not the homeless folks are the problem. It's the converse, and we still hear that, right? We're always going to hear that. But now it's become the society is the problem because we don't have enough housing for all of the people that, live here. I'm hearing that more and more. I hope that's not just wishful thinking, but are you guys hearing that more and more?
Yeah, I agree. I feel that, just lack of affordable housing really puts us in a place where we're not going to be able to move people along, and they're stuck where they're at. One of the things that I will always remember, it was my first job overseeing a female shelter, and I was engaging with a resident. And one thing she had said to me that I still remember to today is that, she said, Vaughn, I talked about all these issues that was going on. She said, at the end of the day, you get to go home and I'm stuck here. And that really made me it really hit me. And again, of course, it still sticks with me. It allows me to be really mindful of my situation and be empathetic to the people that I work with. I don't think people really realize that we get to go home at the end of the day and they're there. I have my gas at our shelter. We have over, at any given night right now, over 100. The trend has been over 100, whereas in years past, at this time of the month, we should be operating at 50. But every night we're at 100, and I see our gas and they're stuck and they're there. They're where are they going to go? Because they're going to be there for a while because we don't have enough resources to provide them, right? We don't have enough funding, whether in our housing component or mostly in our housing component. It's just there's such a lack of it, where we're seeing a backlog in our shelter component, and it's sad. It's sad to see it, and it's I'm sure it's we see it and we say it's sad, but for the folks that are there living it, I'm sure it's discouraging. It's like why what can I do differently? And there's really no answer, right? There's nothing that we can really give them. And the most important thing that we can is a roof over their head. Like, housing is the number one thing. It allows them to then get them to be stable and work on what they need to. They can't do that in a shelter environment. They're cramped in with other people. And if they're trying to stay sober, they can't. There are active people that are using. So it becomes very challenging. It is, and it's very sad. So I'm hopeful that will change, and I'm hopeful that we'll have more housing inventory for our folks that we work with that are very they're down on their luck, so.
Yeah. And I think from the treatment side, right, we see in our treatment programs, particularly in outpatient, we treat over 6,000 people a day across the state in our outpatient programs. And we see that, like, the individuals that don't have stable housing or experiencing homelessness and not adequate housing are really struggling to work towards recovery. And that we as treatment providers might need to change how we support that population, right? So I know one of the things we just had on the podcast in August during Overdose Awareness Week was Heidi Roberto and our mobile van in Worcester. I know we work very closely with both SMOC and Open Sky to support individuals in our outpatient programs, particularly in the mobile van. And it's because we need to support people differently in lots of different ways, right? When they're unhoused, you can't expect somebody to have a routine where they're setting an alarm and getting up to go be fully functional, to take 5 buses to get to a medication, unit, or to get to an appointment to see a provider or see a therapist. That's the last thing on their list, is to come see someone like me, right? When there's not the supports that they need. And so we need to bring medication to people where they are, in shelters, in community, so that they have the opportunity to stay safe, to start to work towards recovery where they are, because we can't change that whole system overnight. And one of the things that really strikes me is that, like, there's small buckets of funding for this, right? That fund your case managers, that fund what you're able to access for units of support and fund shelter programs, but it's not enough. And there's been some movement, right? So I think about, under all of the changes in healthcare reform and the access through kind of the ACOs and community partner programs that we've all been pretty involved in. They have that kind of flexible services program, recognizing that, like, we're not going to reduce your costs, right, to the emergency room if you don't have housing. Like, you can't manage your diabetes, you can't manage your cardiac conditions, you can't manage your mental health or your substance use. Like, none of that gets managed, and we're paying for it somewhere. So why not shift that, right? And we need to do so much more of it, right? Because that's such a limited bucket. Of shifting where we spend our money and consider housing healthcare, right? Like, it is healthcare.
Yep.
And I thought of something that I wanted to throw out there that might also be another kind of like nugget of hope, as you said, Jesse. I think getting to the piece of kind of innovative solutions, like you were saying, Lisa, we really have to rethink how we're providing services and supporting folks. And I think one of the things I'm personally very excited about is that part of our coalition work is it's going to be a little bit of a process. So it'll be like in the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to have created what we're calling a peer housing specialist network. So folks kind of similar to a community health worker approach. So folks with lived experience, but who also have gotten some support and training around navigating systems related to housing, filling out raft applications, how to do landlord applications, where to even look for units, things like that. So those folks, will be, again, stipend. So they'll be in a more formalized role, but embedded in the community, to be able to help friends, family, community members, and have that come from a trusted source, somebody that has training, but also, again, that lived experience piece and the empathy and all of that. So I think that is just one tiny piece, but I think gets to the sort of needing to have more innovative solutions to try to approach these problems.
Caden, I love it. I love it. If I could make this analogy here, I'm almost looking at this as like a recovery coaching for housing, if you will, right? Where you're using your lived experience, and then I was just speaking with someone earlier today about this, and they were interested in getting in to the recovery coaching field, and how do I start that, and where the classes are, and that whole process. But certainly, I think you hit the nail on the head, Caden, with the having it come from a trusted source, right? Someone who's embedded in the community. Because let's face it, like every community is unique and different, and has their own, things that make that community what it is, and special in its own way. So to have somebody that knows all that and also knows how to navigate the larger housing market, I think that's only going to help everybody. And also just another quick thing, because I know these panels, we could go on for like hours, but something else I wrote down just to point out the collaboration between agencies. Amy, I think you had mentioned it, like, your case managers know Vaughn's case managers, and I think it's not too dissimilar to the different treatment programs, from myself coming from a treatment provider perspective of, I know if there's other treatment programs in the area, and we have a mutual patient, that we're going to work collaboratively together, because we both want the best interest of that person. So I think that's great that you're already working together, and I'm sure there'll be more fruit bore, not only from this podcast, but all the efforts that we're talking about here moving on in the future.
And that's one of the things we really try to create with these conversations, is building connections, right? Sending out the messages that we need to hear related to recovery. But then we've had so many connections that have either created the opportunity to have folks on this podcast, or have really strengthened or created connection after. And I think that really just speaks to kind of Caden's last point about trust. We talked early on in this podcast about the need to be trauma informed. And that's really the root of being trauma informed, is like we need to establish trust. People need to trust that we can help them, we want to help them, and that they can trust us in different ways. And so, having people directly in the community is really one of the best ways to build that trust, right? And part of why we're doing so much more direct outreach in communities now as well, so we can build that trust and don't expect people to make it to us, right, on our terms. We really need to change that. I know we're coming up at the end of like our kind of scheduled time, and before we kind of end the recording and all of that, I just want to make sure that I express my gratitude for the work that you are all doing individually and together, and for sharing that experience. I think the more that we talk about it and talk about it with this person first language, I think the more of an impact we can have. So I just want to thank you all for the work that you do and for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah,
so much.
thank you for having us. And it's nice to finally do my first podcast, and I can go and share that with my friends and get them, make them jealous. But thank you. I learned a lot today from you, Amy and Caden. Thank you for sharing that wonderful data earlier. That was very valuable information.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your time with us. And to everyone that's listening to this now or later on, whenever you listen to us, come on again back next week. We're going to have another podcast for Recovery Month. As a reminder, we're doing it every month in September. So we have another themed podcast next week. I think I said next month, but we'll have one next week.
We'll have one next month too, but this month
we'll have one next month as well. But before that, we'll have one next week. Yeah. So like, subscribe, listen to us, and I thoroughly enjoy this. So thank you, everybody.
Yes, I think our next week episode is a lived experience perspective, and it's on purpose. And so I think that is really a great segue from this work, which is so purpose-driven, to really talking about why purpose also feeds recovery. So thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Jesse. Thanks, James. And we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.